Get out. The words hit harder than the heavy thud of Daniel's backpack crashing onto the polished floor of the administrative office. His heart pounded in his chest like a drumbeat of disbelief and pain, louder than the principal's cold, final verdict. For a moment, everything around him blurred: the ticking clock, the rows of trophies behind the glass, even the stares burning into his back from the students outside the glass-paneled office. Principal Whitaker's voice echoed with venomous clarity, slicing through the air like a blade. Ridgewood Prep is an institution for children of upstanding families. You don't belong here. Daniel Carter stood frozen, 16 years old, shoulders squared not in defiance but in disbelief. He wore the same gray hoodie he always did, the sleeves fraying slightly at the cuffs. His sneakers were second-hand, soles nearly smooth from years of wear, and his jeans bore faint stains from helping his father fix fences out on their family's ranch in Cedar Hill, Texas. But none of that should have mattered. He had done everything right. He had stayed late for every tutoring session. Scored higher than nearly every classmate. Turned in his essays early, always addressed teachers with "yes, ma'am" and "no, sir." But none of that shielded him from what had just happened. None of that changed the fact that he had been expelled not for breaking rules, not for academic failure, but for being poor and black. Daniel's voice trembled, but he still spoke with respect. "Sir. I've never missed a deadline. I've never broken a single school rule. I'm in the top 5% of my class." Whitaker's face was stone. His green eyes cold, gleaming under the fluorescent light. His voice dipped lower, just loud enough for the nearby students to hear. "You should know something, Daniel. We're trying to maintain a certain image here. Ridgewood Prep isn't the place for boys who grew up on a cattle farm." Or, he paused, letting his eyes scan Daniel's face with a venomous sneer, "for boys like you." Outside the office, a group of students pretended not to eavesdrop. But their snickers sharp, cruel slipped through the hallway like poison gas. Daniel's throat burned. Not just from the humiliation, but from the truth of it. He wasn't just being dismissed from a school, he was being erased from a world he had fought so hard to enter. He clenched his fists, fingernails biting into his palms. "I believe students should be judged by their work ethic and character," he said softly, "not by where they're from or the color of their skin." Principal Whitaker leaned back in his leather chair, eyebrows raised. "Don't get self-righteous with me, Carter." His voice dropped to a dangerous growl. "Let me make this crystal clear, Ridgewood is for respectable families. You're an outsider. A liability. And frankly," he allowed a malicious smile to tug at his lips, "you're a distraction to our standards." The final word, distraction, hung in the air like smoke from a burning bridge. Suddenly, the office door creaked open. Two school security officers, both white, broad-shouldered, wearing polished nameplates, stepped in. Without a word, they flanked Daniel and grabbed him by the arms. Not violently, but firmly enough to leave no doubt that this wasn't a request. Daniel's heart sank. Through the glass wall of the main office, the entire hallway had gone silent. Dozens of Ridgewood students, mostly from wealthy oil or tech families, watched in amused fascination. He saw smirks. Heard whispers. And then came the voice he dreaded most. "Well, look at that. Took them long enough." It was Parker Langston. Son of an oil executive. Captain of the lacrosse team. And the same boy who'd once called Daniel cattle trash during freshman orientation. Parker's tone was full of smug glee. "Guess the charity case's time is up. Ridgewood's gonna feel a whole lot cleaner come Monday." The laughter that followed was as sharp as a slap. Parker's group, clad in crisp uniforms and expensive watches, laughed loudest. One of them mockingly whispered, "Should have known. Poor and black. What a combo." Daniel's face burned. He tried not to let it show, tried not to look back. But the humiliation was suffocating. He wanted to shout. To cry. To do something. But he knew the rules. Boys like him didn't get to scream in places like Ridgewood. They were supposed to leave quietly. Without protest. Without pride. As he was escorted down the hallway, every step felt like a lifetime. With each pace, the laughter stabbed deeper. His dignity bled in silence. He kept his eyes on the floor. But inside, beneath the shame and fury, something else began to burn. Resolve. A quiet, powerful voice echoed in his mind, one that refused to die. They don't define me. They never will. Daniel Carter didn't know how. Or when. But one day those who had laughed at him would have to watch him rise. And they would regret the moment they ever thought a poor black boy didn't belong. The Texas sun was merciless as Daniel trudged down the gravel road leading away from Ridgewood Preparatory School. Each step felt heavier than the last, his worn-out sneakers kicking up dust that clung to the cuffs of his jeans. His backpack hung limply over one shoulder, now just a symbol of everything that had been taken from him in less than 30 minutes. He didn't dare look back. But the words echoed behind him like a ghost. Distraction. You don't belong. Cleaner come Monday. The phrases clawed at his brain, louder than the crunch of dirt under his feet. Daniel blinked furiously, willing the burning in his eyes to disappear. He wasn't going to cry. Not out here. Not where someone might still see him. By the time he reached the rusted front gate of his family's small ranch house, the sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the field. The old swing on the porch creaked softly in the breeze. The scent of hay and fresh earth usually brought him comfort. Not today. He hesitated at the steps. His chest tightened. Not because he was afraid of being punished. But because he didn't want to see the disappointment in his parents' faces, the people who had sacrificed everything so he could go to a school like Ridgewood. The screen door creaked open before he could knock. Daniel, his mother's voice rang out, soft but anxious. Her face appeared in the doorway, framed by the fading sunlight. Elena Carter was a strong woman, weathered by work but kind-eyed and always full of warmth. Except now, her expression was clouded with concern. You're late. We were getting worried. She paused, her eyes narrowing as she saw his slumped shoulders and reddened eyes. What happened? Daniel couldn't answer. He looked down at his shoes still covered in the red Ridgewood dirt. His lips parted, but nothing came out. Daniel, his father's voice came from deeper inside the house. Marcus Carter stepped out a moment later, tall, stoic, still wearing his work gloves from fixing the tractor out back. He removed them slowly, sensing something was wrong. What's going on, son? He asked, calm but direct. Daniel stood there, his throat dry, his heart pounding all over again. They expelled me, he finally choked out. The words hung in the air like thunder. His mother gasped, covering her mouth. His father froze, eyes narrowing. What? Elena whispered. Why? What happened? Daniel shook his head. They said. I don't belong there. That I'm a distraction. Said people like me don't fit the image they're trying to maintain. He didn't mention the rest. He couldn't bring himself to repeat Parker's words. Not yet. His father's jaw tightened. His mother's eyes welled with tears. You mean to tell me, Marcus said slowly, that after all the early mornings, all the work you've put in after staying up with flashlights during power outages just to finish essays, they threw you out because we're not rich enough? Daniel nodded. And because I'm black. Elena's knees nearly buckled. She sank onto the porch swing, one hand clutching her chest. Baby, I'm so sorry, she whispered. I thought Ridgewood was going to change your life. Daniel sat beside her, staring into the dusty horizon. It did. Just not the way we thought. His father remained standing, his back rigid, fists clenched at his sides. For a long while, no one spoke. The only sounds were the creak of the swing and the distant chirping of cicadas. Then Marcus exhaled, long and bitter. "I should have known," he muttered. "They smile at us in meetings. Pretend to be progressive in their brochures. But the second they see a poor black kid rise too fast, too proud, they get scared." He turned and faced his son. "You didn't fail, Daniel. They did." Daniel looked up, eyes brimming with unshed tears. "But I disappointed you. I know how much you two gave up just to get me in that school. And now I have nothing to show for it." "No," his mother said firmly, her voice trembling but resolute. "You stood up for yourself. You didn't back down. That takes more courage than any diploma. We're proud of you. Always." His father nodded. "They might have tried to humiliate you, but you didn't let them take your dignity." Daniel finally let the tears fall, not out of shame, but from the overwhelming weight of love and grief colliding inside him. That night, dinner was quiet. No one had much appetite. The old radio in the kitchen played a gospel tune that floated faintly through the air, but none of them sang along like they used to. Later, lying on his twin mattress, Daniel stared up at the cracked ceiling. The moonlight filtered in through the slats of the blinds, painting silver streaks on the floor. He replayed every word Principal Whitaker had said. Every laugh from Parker. Every step down that hallway. But he also remembered what his father said: "You didn't fail. They did." And just like that, the spark reignited inside him. Dim, but still alive. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But he knew this: he would rise again. And the world that tried to crush him would one day have to watch him soar. The next morning began with the same silence that had blanketed the Carter household all night. Daniel hadn't slept. Not really. He had closed his eyes. But sleep refused to come. The sting of humiliation clung to him like red dirt on worn sneakers. His alarm buzzed at 6 a.m. out of habit, but he didn't move. What was the point? He wasn't a student at Ridgewood anymore. There were no books to carry. No locker to open. No hallways to navigate cautiously. He was, according to Principal Whitaker, officially unwelcome. But as the first rays of sunlight peeked over the distant tree line, a sound broke through the still air. A low, thunderous rumble. At first, Daniel thought it was a truck. Maybe the neighbor's grain delivery. But it grew louder, deeper. A sound that vibrated through the walls of the house and rattled dishes in the sink. Then he heard his mother gasp from the porch. "Daniel," she called. He shot up from bed, his heart pounding. He rushed to the window and flung open the blinds. What he saw nearly made him forget how to breathe. Hovering above Ridgewood Preparatory School less than 2 miles down the road was a sleek, black helicopter. Its rotors carved violently through the morning air, kicking up clouds of dust and leaves across the school's expansive lawn. Students scattered. Teachers shielded their eyes. Security guards looked helpless. And emblazoned on the side of the chopper, gleaming like fire in the sunlight, was a single golden letter, K. Daniel blinked twice. His eyes wide. Even from here, he knew what that symbol meant. Kingston Enterprises. The K wasn't just any logo. It belonged to Thomas Kingston, America's most powerful agricultural billionaire. The man who transformed drought-resistant crops into a multi-billion-dollar empire. The man who was known for avoiding public appearances and who hadn't set foot in a high school since he left his own decades ago. "What is he doing at Ridgewood?" Daniel whispered. His mother didn't respond. She just stood beside him, hand over her heart, staring. Then the phone rang. Daniel's father picked it up in the kitchen. A few words were exchanged. Short. Stiff. Marcus Carter hung up slowly, turned toward his family, and said in a tone none of them had ever heard before. "He's not just at Ridgewood. He's here for you. Daniel's mouth dropped. What? But there was no time to process it. Because just then, another deep rumble shook the house and a second helicopter was descending, this time directly above the Carter family's field. Daniel ran out the door, his bare feet slapping against the porch. The rotor wash sent hay flying in all directions. The neighbors poked their heads out in confusion. Chickens scattered. Dust curled in spirals across the sky. And then, as the blades slowed and the noise settled, the helicopter door opened. Out stepped Thomas Kingston. He was tall. Impeccably dressed in a custom navy blue suit, sunglasses reflecting the morning sun. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly groomed. But it was the way he walked, calm, calculated, like the world adjusted to him, that silenced the entire neighborhood. He moved toward the porch, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel. Then he stopped, just a few feet from Daniel, and looked him straight in the eye. "You must be Daniel Carter," he said, voice deep, steady. Daniel nodded slowly, unsure whether to speak. Kingston's eyes narrowed, not in hostility, but in quiet intensity. "Your father once saved my company," he said plainly. "He probably never told you." Daniel looked to his father, who was now stepping outside, frozen in disbelief. Kingston continued. "Over 25 years ago, during one of the worst financial droughts in Texas history, your father gave me the only thing I needed: trust. He risked everything on someone no one believed in." Marcus cleared his throat. "It was the right thing to do." Kingston nodded. "And now, I'm here to do the right thing for your son." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Sir, I don't understand." Kingston took a slow breath. "I heard what happened to you at Ridgewood. The expulsion. The humiliation. The racism." His tone dropped, sharper now. "And I won't stand for it." Daniel's stomach twisted. "But, why would someone like you care about someone like me?" That's when Kingston said something Daniel would never forget. "Because I was you." The silence after that sentence was absolute. Kingston stepped closer. "I know what it's like to be told you're less than. To be laughed at. To be cast out for things you can't control. And I also know what happens when people like us rise anyway." He turned back toward the helicopter, then looked at Daniel again. "Get ready," he said. "We're going to change everything." The wind roared again as the helicopter blades came back to life, slicing through the air like justice sharpening its blade. Daniel sat in the passenger seat beside Thomas Kingston, buckled in tight, his palms sweating as the world below grew smaller. Their family ranch, the gravel road, the sagging front porch where his mother waved with teary eyes, all shrunk beneath the spinning rotors. But something inside him grew bigger. His shame was gone. Now there was only fire. Kingston sat like a statue of authority, arms folded, gaze locked forward. He hadn't said much since they lifted off. He didn't need to. His presence was the statement. As the school came into view, Daniel could already see students gathering in the courtyard, their heads tilted toward the sound of the approaching aircraft. Teachers stepped out of classrooms. Security guards ran to the lawn, unsure whether to act or simply stare. The moment the helicopter touched down, the courtyard was chaos. Phones came out. Whispers turned into gasps. And then the door opened. Kingston stepped out first, slow, deliberate, commanding. Daniel followed, his boots crunching against the stone walkway as he emerged into the sunlight. The two walked side by side across the wide open lawn, as though the world itself had cleared a path for them. Every eye was locked on them. And at the far end of the courtyard, Principal Whitaker stood frozen, his face pale, his tie askew, sweat visibly forming at his temples. "Mr. Kingston," Whitaker called out, forcing a smile that trembled at the edges. I wasn't expecting this visit. If we had known." Kingston raised a single hand. The principal stopped talking. "I'm not here to make conversation, Whitaker," Kingston said, his voice clear and unshakable. "I'm here to address a disgrace." A hush swept over the students. "I've heard everything," Kingston continued. "About how you humiliated this young man. About how you expelled him not for academic dishonesty or misconduct but because of his skin and his family's income." Whitaker's lips parted, but Kingston cut him off with a single glance. "Don't lie to me." He turned toward the crowd of students, who were now entirely still, watching like the school had become a courtroom and this was the final trial. "Daniel Carter is one of the most brilliant, hard-working students this school has ever seen," Kingston declared. "And yesterday, he was stripped of his dignity, not because of what he did but because of what he is. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is something I will never tolerate." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones were now filming. Whitaker glanced nervously at the cameras. "Mr. Kingston," he said, a bead of sweat rolling down his cheek. "There may have been some miscommunication." Kingston took a single step closer. "This is not a negotiation," he said coldly. "Either you reinstate Daniel Carter immediately with a public apology or I will withdraw every single dollar my foundation has ever donated to Ridgewood. Furthermore, I will expose this institution for what it has become, a sanctuary for elitism and discrimination." Gasps. Students turned toward each other. Some whispered Daniel's name. Whitaker was shaking now. "There's no need to escalate things. Surely we can handle this privately." "No," Kingston snapped. "You didn't humiliate him privately. You did it here. In front of everyone." He pointed to the courtyard. "So you'll fix it here. In front of everyone." Silence. Then Kingston turned toward Daniel and said loud enough for the entire campus to hear, "Daniel, do you want to be back here?" Daniel stood straight, lifting his chin. "I don't want charity," he said. "But I do want justice." Kingston smiled for the first time. "Then you'll have it." Suddenly, a voice from the back shouted, "What about Parker?" Heads turned. It was a freshman one who had seen the bullying, the mockery. He laughed when they dragged Daniel out. He called him trash. Gasps again. Now eyes darted to Parker Langston, standing beside his friends, lips suddenly dry, face drained of color. He looked around, realizing his shield of privilege was crumbling. Kingston's gaze cut through him. "There will be accountability," he said calmly. "For everyone." Then, without taking his eyes off Whitaker, he said, "You have 2 minutes. Apologize publicly. Restore Daniel's status. Or watch Ridgewood lose everything." Whitaker's composure shattered. "I apologize," he stammered, turning to Daniel. "Daniel Carter, you are reinstated. I deeply regret my actions. They were inappropriate and discriminatory. And I promise this will never happen again." But it was too late to save face. Everyone had seen the fear in his eyes. Everyone had seen who truly held the power now. Kingston turned to Daniel. "From this day on," he said, "walk these halls knowing no one will ever look down on you again. Because now they know exactly who stands behind you." Daniel looked up at the faces staring at him, not with scorn this time, but with respect. Or fear. Or both. Either way, the message was clear: Daniel Carter was back. And this time, the system would answer to him. The courtyard slowly began to settle. Phones lowered. Students whispered behind hands, unsure how to process what they had just witnessed. It wasn't every day a billionaire descended from the sky to defend a poor boy with nothing but dignity left. But while the crowd lingered in stunned silence, Thomas Kingston wasn't done. He turned to Daniel and rested a hand on his shoulder, firm but calm. "Let's take a walk," he said quietly. Without waiting for permission, Kingston led Daniel away from the courtyard. The cameras, the gossip, the gawking eyes, they all faded behind them as they walked down the side path toward the school's main gate. Daniel kept his eyes forward. His pulse was still racing. "I don't understand," he finally said after a long silence. "Why go through all this for me?" Kingston stopped walking. They stood under a tall oak tree just beyond the edge of the campus. He looked at Daniel with the kind of seriousness that made the morning air feel heavier. "Because your father once saved my life," Kingston said. Daniel blinked. "What? Not literally. But close." Kingston's eyes softened, his voice low and steady. "When I was 25, I had just started Kingston Enterprises. I had a vision, but no support. Banks laughed me out the door. Investors walked away. I was a black man trying to pitch a farming revolution to rich white financiers. They treated me like a joke." Daniel listened, captivated. He had never heard Kingston speak like this, not in any interview, not in any article. "One night, I ended up in Cedar Hill," Kingston continued. "Broke. Hungry. Desperate. I was trying to pitch to a farming co-op just to keep my operation alive one more week." He smiled faintly. "Your father was there. He didn't have money. But he gave me something better, his name." Daniel stared, stunned. "His name?" Kingston nodded. He stood up in front of 80 skeptical landowners and said, "If this young man says he can grow food better, I believe him. And I'll plant his seed on my field first." Daniel's breath caught in his chest. Kingston's voice turned quiet. "That night, your father's words gave me the only thing no one else would, a chance. That pilot crop from your family's field proved everything. It saved my business. It saved my dream." Daniel was speechless. "I never forgot that," Kingston said. "But I also never wanted to repay it with charity. I told myself, when the day comes, I'll know what to do." He looked Daniel in the eye. "And yesterday, when I heard what they did to you, when I read the transcript of that meeting, the racial slurs, the lies, I knew the day had come." Daniel swallowed hard, trying to speak, but his throat tightened. "So no," Kingston said firmly, "this isn't about pity. Or making a scene. This is about honor. Your father gave me dignity when I had none. Now I return it." Daniel's voice cracked as he asked, "Did he know?" Kingston smiled. "Not until this morning." Daniel looked toward the horizon where his father's ranch sat under the morning sun, and suddenly, he saw it all differently. The quiet man with cracked hands and a strong back, the man who never boasted about anything, had once believed in a stranger when no one else would. And today, that belief had circled back, changing his son's life forever. "I owe your family more than I could ever repay," Kingston said. "You don't owe us anything," Daniel said softly. "But, thank you." Kingston nodded once. "You earned your place at Ridgewood, Daniel. But now, I want to offer you something bigger." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek envelope with a deep navy seal and gold lettering. Daniel took it with trembling fingers and slowly opened it. Inside was a formal invitation. The Young Leaders for Justice Fellowship. A full-ride mentorship program designed to shape the next generation of advocates for equality, reform, and social change. The first name on the list of selected candidates: Daniel Elijah Carter. Daniel stared at the words, blinking in disbelief. "This is real?" he asked. Kingston smiled. "As real as the soil under your feet. You'll study leadership, law, public policy. Travel. Train. Be mentored by the best minds in America. And someday soon, you won't just defend yourself. You'll be the one standing up for others." Daniel looked up, eyes glassy. "Why me?" "Because you've already proven you have what it takes," Kingston said. "You stood tall when the world tried to break you. You didn't fold. You fought back with dignity. That's what a leader looks like." Daniel stared down at the letter, the weight of it sinking in. This wasn't just an offer. It was a calling. Kingston checked his watch, then placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder one last time. I'll give you a few days to decide. But no matter what you choose, know this, you already made your father proud. And today, you made me proud too. With that, Kingston turned and walked back toward the helicopter waiting behind the school building. Daniel stood alone under the oak tree, wind gently rustling the leaves above. He looked down at the letter again. He didn't feel small anymore. He felt like the beginning of something big. The walk home felt longer than usual. Daniel clutched the navy envelope in his hands the entire way, afraid that if he put it in his pocket, he might wake up and find it was never real. The sky above Ridgewood was cloudless, the wind calm, but inside Daniel's chest, a storm had begun to build. He didn't stop until he reached the porch. His parents were already outside, sitting quietly side by side. They'd seen the helicopter rise into the sky. They'd heard the whispers from neighbors and the shocked gasps of students that reached even the edge of the Carter property. But when they looked up and saw Daniel approaching, their expressions shifted not to concern, but to something deeper, wonder. Daniel sat on the porch steps. For a few moments, none of them spoke. Then he held up the envelope. They offered me a scholarship, he said softly. Marcus leaned forward, brows raised. Kingston? Daniel nodded. It's called the Young Leaders for Justice program. It's huge. Like once-in-a-lifetime huge. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. They'll train me. In leadership, law, public policy, travel across the country. Be mentored by real-world changemakers. And they picked you? Marcus asked, though his voice wasn't one of doubt, it was pure awe. Daniel gave a tight smile. I'm the first person they're offering it to. There was a long pause. Elena blinked back tears. Daniel, that's more than we ever imagined. But I'm not sure if I should take it, he said quietly. Both parents froze. What? His father asked. Daniel stared out across the field, the evening sun casting golden streaks over the tall grass. I know this program would change everything, he said. But, part of me wants to stay. At Ridgewood. Finish the school year. Walk those halls. Look people like Principal Whitaker and Parker Langston in the eye every day and show them they didn't break me. His voice hardened. I want them to see me rise. Not hear about it later on TV. I want them to regret what they did. Every single day. His mother looked at him for a long moment, then reached over and took his hand. I understand, she said. God knows, I understand that need to show the world it was wrong. But, Marcus said gently, you don't have to prove your worth to small-minded people anymore. Daniel turned to face his father. You said once that Ridgewood would open doors. But this isn't a door, Dad. It's a launch pad. Marcus nodded. So what's really holding you back? Daniel didn't speak right away. Then he admitted, I'm scared. Of what? That if I go, I'll be leaving unfinished business behind. That Parker and Whitaker will go on like nothing ever happened. That if I leave, people like me who still go to Ridgewood will keep getting stepped on. His mother's eyes softened. Baby, sometimes, the best way to finish the fight is to win it somewhere bigger. You think walking away means surrender, Marcus said. But what if it's the opposite? What if walking away is how you take the fight to a place they can't even reach? Daniel let their words sink in. You want to show them they were wrong? Elena asked. Then show them by doing something so extraordinary they'll have no choice but to remember your name. Daniel looked down at the envelope again. A gust of wind swept across the porch, making the corner of the letter flap gently in his fingers like it was trying to push him forward. He took a deep breath. Then he stood up. I'll do it, he said. I'll join the program. And I won't just rise for me. I'll rise for everyone they tried to silence. His father smiled. That's my boy. His mother wiped a tear from her cheek. They tried to bury you, but they didn't know you were a seed. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep, but this time, not because of anxiety or shame. His mind was racing with ideas, dreams, plans. He was already envisioning the world he could help build. The next morning, the black helicopter returned, its arrival no longer a shock to the neighbors, who gathered again at the edges of their fences, waving as it landed in the same field as before. This time, Daniel didn't hesitate. He wore a clean shirt, jeans, and the same pair of dusty boots that had carried him down Ridgewood's hallways. He stepped into the helicopter with his chin held high, his parents behind him, proud. From above, as the landscape of his hometown grew smaller, Daniel looked out the window, not with sadness, but with purpose. He wasn't running. He was rising. And soon, the world would hear his voice. The view from 27 stories above ground was something Daniel Carter had never seen before. Standing behind a wall of glass in the executive wing of Kingston Enterprises, he looked out at the steel skyline of Dallas, Texas, a sea of towers, freeways, and ambition stretching far beyond the fences of his family ranch. The city pulsed below him like a living organism, breathing opportunity and challenge in every direction. Daniel stood in quiet awe, wearing a pressed blue shirt, navy slacks, and his father's old leather watch. Everything else felt new, too new. Even the air smelled different here. Like polished marble, cold steel, and expensive coffee. But underneath it all, he still felt like the boy with second-hand sneakers and dirt-stained jeans. Overwhelming, huh? The voice broke his thoughts. Daniel turned to see a woman approaching, tall, sharp-eyed, dressed in a sleek gray suit. Her ID badge read, Ava Langford, Program Director, Young Leaders for Justice. You'll get used to the altitude, she said, smiling faintly. What you shouldn't get used to is silence. Because out there, she pointed beyond the glass, people are making decisions every minute that will impact communities like yours for decades. Daniel nodded. I'm ready to learn. No, Ava said. You're here because you're ready to lead. She motioned him to follow. Come on. Orientation's about to start. The next few hours were a blur. Daniel found himself in a large, high-tech briefing room surrounded by 11 other fellows, all from different corners of the country. There was Maya, a leading student activist from East LA, who had once organized a hunger strike against school closures. Ravi, a tech-savvy genius from New Jersey who created an app that connected homeless shelters with surplus food vendors. Imani, a soft-spoken but razor-sharp debate champion from Chicago who'd been expelled from her prep school for calling out racist curriculum. Every one of them had a story like Daniel's, and every one of them had scars, visible or not. Ava stood at the head of the room, tapping a sleek digital board behind her. This isn't just a scholarship, she began. It's not even just training. This is pressure. This is scrutiny. This is the battlefield where change begins. And you've been chosen because you've already proven you won't fold when the world pushes back. The room fell silent. Then she pointed to Daniel. Carter. Tell them why you're here. Daniel froze for half a second. Then he stood up, heart thudding in his chest, and spoke clearly. I'm here because someone tried to erase me from a school I earned my way into. Because they said I didn't belong. Because I didn't come from money, and because I was black. A few nods. A few glances of solidarity. But I didn't let them define me. I stood my ground. And now I'm here, because I want to make sure no one else has to fight that battle alone. Maya clapped once. Others followed. Not out of politeness but recognition. Ava smiled. Welcome to the table, Carter. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's world exploded with new experiences. He debated with state legislators. Trained with legal scholars on civil rights history. visited underserved schools across the South. He toured prisons, met reformed activists, and learned how policies were shaped not just by law but by money, media, and fear. He wasn't just being educated. He was being armed. One night, after a brutal simulation where fellows had to defend a mock policy reform before a hostile mock press, Daniel sat alone on the rooftop patio of the Kingston campus, watching the lights of the city blink against the darkness. Ava found him there. "You held your ground today," she said, sitting beside him. "I got rattled," Daniel admitted. "They said I sounded angry. Emotional. And? I don't want to be dismissed like that." Ava nodded. "They'll always say that when the truth makes them uncomfortable. But emotion isn't weakness, Daniel. It's what brought you here. Just remember to channel it, don't drown in it." He looked down at the skyline again. "Do you think I'm doing okay?" "I think," she said, "you're one of the few people in this building who knows what injustice feels like firsthand. That's a kind of clarity most people spend their lives pretending to understand." She stood up. "Keep going. Keep burning. But do it smart." As she walked away, Daniel whispered to himself, "I will." That weekend, every fellow was tasked with launching a micro-campaign, a local project that reflected their values. Daniel chose to return to Ridgewood. Not to fight, but to teach. He organized a weekend town hall on school equity, bringing together students, parents, and even faculty from Ridgewood and nearby public schools. He didn't mention his expulsion. He didn't have to. The change in tone when he walked through those gates again, this time in a suit and with press badges behind him, said it all. He was no longer just a former student. He was a voice. A force. And people listened. That night, Daniel stood in front of a mirror in his hotel room, staring at his own reflection. There were no medals yet. No billboards. No front-page headlines. But behind his eyes burned something real. Purpose. The email came on a gray Thursday morning. Subject line, Invitation to testify, Texas State Education Hearing on Institutional Bias in Private Schools. Daniel blinked twice, rereading the lines. It was real. The state was launching a public inquiry into allegations of systemic discrimination at elite prep schools across Texas, and Daniel Carter had been asked to testify on behalf of students who had suffered under those systems. The hearing would be held in Austin. Broadcast live. Before a packed room of state board members, legal observers, school administrators, and journalists. Daniel closed the laptop. And breathed in the weight of the moment. He arrived in Austin 3 days later, accompanied by Ava Langford and a Kingston legal advisor. Dressed in a charcoal gray suit and white dress shirt, Daniel looked more like a young attorney than the boy who had once been dragged from Ridgewood's hallways. The hearing chamber buzzed with tension. Cameras were everywhere. Rows of officials lined the front, some with curious stares, others guarded behind thin smiles. Daniel's nameplate sat neatly on the witness table. As he took his seat, he noticed something across the room that made his stomach drop. Principal Whitaker. The man sat stiffly, flanked by Ridgewood's legal team. His expression was a mix of contained hostility and thinly veiled anxiety. And next to him, Parker Langston, dressed in a blazer, flanked by his father, Bryce Langston, a prominent oil magnate and Ridgewood donor. So this was the lineup. The people who had once laughed at Daniel. Now forced to listen. The chairwoman of the board adjusted her mic. "We'll now hear from Mr. Daniel Carter, Student Fellow of the Young Leaders for Justice Initiative. Mr. Carter, you have 5 minutes." Daniel stood, adjusted the mic, and looked straight ahead. "Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board," he began. "My name is Daniel Carter. I am 17 years old. I grew up on a ranch outside Cedar Hill. My parents are working-class Texans. I am also, until recently, a former student of Ridgewood Preparatory School. He paused. Not for effect but to gather the storm inside him into something controlled. I was expelled from Ridgewood not because I broke the rules. Not because I failed academically. But because I was black, poor, and didn't fit the image the school wanted to maintain. Murmurs rippled through the audience. In a hallway filled with students, I was publicly labeled a distraction, an outsider. My dignity was stripped in front of my peers. Security was used as intimidation. And for what? Because my background embarrassed someone in a tailored suit? Daniel's voice remained calm but every word hit like a hammer. I'm not the only one. Across this state, and this country, there are students like me being pushed to the edges of institutions that claim to care about excellence. But what they really care about too often is image. Legacy. Control. He locked eyes with Whitaker. Today, I stand here not because I want revenge, but because I believe this system can change. But it won't change if we pretend what happened to me was an isolated incident. It wasn't. It was policy unwritten, but enforced. He took a breath. So my message is simple: if your school punishes dignity and rewards silence, it's not an education system. It's a gatekeeping machine. And it's time we break it open. The chamber erupted in applause. The board chairwoman smiled. Thank you, Mr. Carter. We'll now open the floor to questions. A tall board member leaned in. Mr. Carter, what would you say to those who claim your story, though powerful, is anecdotal? Daniel nodded slowly. I'd say, anecdote is often the only proof the oppressed are allowed to carry. Because systems like Ridgewood are built to erase the data, erase the paper trail, erase the discomfort. But I'm still here. And I remember everything. Another board member asked, and what changes would you recommend? Daniel didn't hesitate. Mandatory third-party audits of disciplinary actions across private schools. Diversity in leadership, not just brochures. Community oversight panels. And scholarship protections that don't evaporate under pressure from wealthy donors. The room grew still again. Daniel had done more than share a story. He had offered a roadmap. When the hearing ended, and officials filed out, reporters crowded the hallways. But Daniel's eyes weren't on the cameras. They were on Principal Whitaker, who stood silently across the corridor, surrounded by lawyers, but visibly shaken. For a moment, their eyes met. Daniel gave a simple nod. Not of peace. But of finality. This chapter is closed. But as he turned to leave, another voice called out. Daniel. He stopped. It was Parker Langston. The boy looked smaller now. Paler. His voice wasn't mocking, it was strained. I didn't think this would ever get this far. Daniel stared at him. That's the problem. You never thought at all. Parker looked down. I guess I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Then, it's not me you need to apologize to. It's the next kid like me who walks into Ridgewood. You make it better for him? Then maybe we'll talk. He walked away. This time, he didn't look back. 3 months later, the boy they once dragged out of Ridgewood in silence now stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, microphone in hand, suit crisp, voice steady as tens of thousands watched. Cameras from every major news outlet lined the front. Reporters from the New York Times, CNN, NPR, and even international media jostled for position. The hashtag Daniel Carter speech trended #1 worldwide before he'd even opened his mouth. But Daniel wasn't here for fame. He was here for purpose. Behind him stood a wall of young people, students, artists, activists, coders, immigrants, athletes, kids from trailer parks and housing projects, native reservations and refugee shelters. They wore no uniforms, no party colors, just one shared badge on their chests. Youth for Justice Coalition, founded 2024. Daniel took a breath and began. My name is Daniel Carter. I am 17 years old. I grew up in a small ranch town in Texas. I was expelled from a private school not for cheating, fighting, or failing but for being poor. And for being black. The crowd held its breath. And that moment, as painful as it was, lit something inside me that never went out. It made me realize that dignity is not something we are given. It's something we must claim. He paused, scanning the faces, some tearful, some defiant. And I learned that the system didn't fail me because it was broken. It failed me because it was working exactly as it was designed to. Rumbling applause began. But today, I stand not as a victim, Daniel said, voice rising, but as a builder of something new. He turned and motioned to the group behind him. These young leaders, many of whom were dismissed, detained, discriminated against, are not your future. They are your present. We are not waiting for permission to change the world. We are doing it now. Thunderous applause rolled across the National Mall. The Youth for Justice Coalition had begun with just 12 names, the original fellows in Kingston's program. But Daniel had expanded it. He'd spent the past few months traveling coast to coast, meeting with youth organizers in Detroit, school walkout leaders in Florida, climate justice teens in Arizona. He hosted late-night Zoom calls with kids from Chicago's South Side to Oakland's Chinatown. And somehow, despite the pressure, the hate mail, the media scrutiny, he kept showing up. He wasn't interested in being a symbol anymore. He wanted to be a platform. And that platform now included a legal defense fund for wrongfully disciplined students, a database exposing racially biased school policies, an annual Youth Justice Summit, a policy think tank where young minds could help draft real legislation. Daniel was no longer reacting to injustice. He was rewriting the rules. After the speech, Ava Langford met him backstage, her eyes glassy with pride. "You've done it," she said. Daniel shook his head. "We've started it." She smirked. "Still can't take a compliment?" He chuckled. "Not until the system changes for good." Then another voice joined them, deeper, familiar. "Well spoken, son." Daniel turned. Thomas Kingston, now more than just a mentor, walked toward him with a firm handshake and a fatherly pat on the shoulder. "I've seen a lot of movements rise," Kingston said. "But very few start with this much clarity." "Clarity comes from pain," Daniel replied. "And wisdom," Kingston added. "You've got both." He handed Daniel a small velvet box. Inside, a lapel pin, solid silver, engraved with a single word, justice. Kingston nodded. "It belonged to my grandfather. He fought for voting rights in the 1960s. Wore this the day he got arrested for sitting in a whites-only diner." Daniel swallowed hard. "I think," Kingston said, "it's time someone new wore it." Daniel held the pin in his palm, feeling the cool metal against his skin. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. But it carried history. And responsibility. Later that night, Daniel stood on the rooftop of the Washington Hotel, looking out at the city lights. His phone buzzed message after message, interviews, invitations, congratulations. But his mind drifted back to Cedar Hill. To the dirt road. To his parents' porch. To the day he walked home in silence, humiliated, broken. If only the boy from that afternoon could see the boy tonight. No. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a leader. And this was just the beginning. Final note: Daniel Carter's story was never about a single injustice. It was about the spark injustice ignites. And what happens when that spark finds someone brave enough to carry it forward, not alone, but with a generation behind him. Because when the system pushes one of us down, and we rise louder, smarter, stronger, we don't just survive. We build the world we deserve.